Knight c6. d3. Bishop b4. Knight e2. d5. d4. Bishop e6. Bishop g5. h6. Bishop d2. Queen e7. E takes d5. Knight takes d5. a3. Bishop a5. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. g3. E takes d4. Bishop takes a5. Knight takes a5. Queen takes d4. Bishop takes f3. Queen b4. Queen e5. Long castle. Bishop takes h1. Queen d4. Queen e4. Bishop h3. Short castle. Queen b4. Queen takes e2. Rook takes h1. Rook a c8. Bishop takes c8. b6. Rook d1. c5. Queen g4. Queen takes h2. b4. Knight b3 check. C takes b3. Rook takes c8. Queen takes c8 check. King h7. Queen e8. Queen takes g3. Rook d8. C takes b4. Queen g8 check. King g6. A takes b4. Queen takes b3. Rook d6 check. King f5. Queen h7 check. g6. Queen takes f7 check. King e5. Queen takes b3. King takes d6. Queen h3. King e7. Queen a3. King f6. Queen takes a7. g5. Queen takes b6 check. King f5. Queen takes h6. g4. b5. g3. Queen h3 check. King f4. b6. King f3. Queen f1 check. King g4. King d2. King h4. King e2. King g4. Queen g2. King f4. b7. King g4. b8 promotes to queen. King h4. Queen b takes g3 check. King h5. Queen g5 checkmate.
Checkmate. White is victorious.
Game start. g3. e5. e4. d5. Bishop d3. Knight f6. Knight f3. Bishop g4. Knight takes e5. Bishop takes d1. King takes d1. D takes e4. Bishop b5 check. c6. Knight takes f7. King takes f7. d3. Knight g4. Bishop c4 check. King e8. f3. Knight f2 check. King e2. Knight takes h1. Bishop f7 check. King takes f7. Knight d2. E takes f3 check. King takes f3. Queen b6. Knight c4. Queen f2 check. King e4. Queen takes c2. Bishop g5. Knight f2 check. King e5. Knight d7 check. King f5. Queen takes d3 check. King f4. Queen takes c4 check. King e3. Knight g4 check. King d2. h6. Rook c1. Queen takes a2. King c2. H takes g5. h3. Knight e3 check. King c3. a5. Rook c2. Bishop b4 check. King d3. Knight takes c2. h4, queen takes b2, h takes g5, queen c3 check, king e4, rook a e8 check, king f4, queen e3 check, king f5, queen takes g3, g6 check, queen takes g6 check, king f4, rook e6, king f3, queen e4 check, king g3, rook f6,
Stalemate.
Bishop e5. Rook takes d6. Bishop takes d6. Queen takes h6. Queen g1 check. Queen c1. Queen takes g2. h6. Bishop e5. Bishop c2. Queen takes f3. Queen g1 check. b6. h7. Game start. e4. e6. d4. c5. Knight f3. C takes d4. c3. d5. e5. d takes c3. Knight takes c3. Knight c6. Bishop d3. Knight ge7. Short castle. Knight g6. Rook e1. Queen c7. Knight b5. Queen b8. Bishop takes g6. H takes g6. Bishop f4. Bishop d7. Rook c1. Queen d8. Bishop g3. Rook c8. a3. a6. Game start. c4. e5. g3. Knight f6. Bishop g2. c6. Knight f3. d6. Knight c3. Bishop e7. d3. h6. Short castle. Short castle. Rook b1. Knight bd7. b4. Rook e8. b5. d5. b takes c6. b takes c6. c takes d5. c takes d5. Knight d2. Knight b6. a4. a5. Knight b5. Bishop b4. Bishop b2. Bishop g4. Knight f3. Rook c8. Knight takes e5. d4. h3. Bishop h5. Knight f3. Knight fd5. Game start. e4. e6. d4. d5. E takes d5. E takes d5. Knight f3. Knight f6. Bishop d3. c5. Short castle. c4. Bishop e2. Bishop e7. b3. c takes b3. a takes b3. Knight c6. h3. Short castle. Bishop d3. Knight b4. Rook e1. Knight takes d3. Queen takes d3. Bishop e6. Bishop a3. Rook e8. Bishop takes e7. Queen takes e7. Knight c3. Queen c7. Knight e5. a6. Rook e3. Rook a c8. Rook a e1. h6. Queen e2. Queen b6. f4. d5. Knight f3. Knight f6. g3. g6. Bishop g2. Bishop g7. Rook f1. Queen takes c2. Rook a c1. Queen b3. a5. Rook d3. Rook fe1. Bishop h6. Rook takes c6. Rook takes e3. Rook takes e3. Queen takes e3 check. Queen takes e3. Bishop takes e3 check. King f1. Bishop g4. Bishop h3. Game start. e4, e6, d4, c5, e5, d5, c3, knight c6, knight f3, queen b6, bishop d3, c takes d4, c takes d4, bishop d7, short castle, knight takes d4, knight c3, knight c6, rook e1, a6, a3, rook c8, knight a4, queen a5, bishop d2, queen d8, rook c1, knight b8, knight c3, knight e7, h4, knight ec6, h5, h6, knight h2, d4, knight e4, queen b6, bishop f4, game start, f4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, b3, g6, bishop b2, bishop g7, e3, short castle, bishop e2, c5, short castle, d4, e takes d4, knight c6, d takes c5, queen a5, d4, rook d8, a3, queen c7, b4, b6, c3, knight e4, d5, bishop f5, c4, bishop takes b2, rook a2, knight c3, knight takes c3, bishop takes c3, queen b3, knight d4, queen takes c3, knight takes f3 check, bishop takes f3, b takes c5, game start, e4, e6, d4, c5, knight f3, c takes d4, knight takes d4, d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop b5 check, knight c6, short castle, bishop d7, rook e1 check, bishop e7, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, queen e2, king f8, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, rook b8, rook a d1, bishop d6, queen f3, rook b4, bishop g3, bishop takes g3, queen takes g3, queen b8, queen e3, queen d8, b3, rook b8, knight f3, f4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, c takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, knight b6, d4, c6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight 8 d7, short castle, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, short castle, e5, c5, c3, queen b6, knight f3, knight c6, a3, knight h6, b4, c takes d4, c takes d4, knight f5, bishop b2, bishop d7, g4, knight fe7, knight c3, knight a5, knight a4, queen c6, knight c5, knight c4, bishop c1, b6, knight takes d7, queen takes d7, Bishop d3. h5. g5. a5. g6. Knight takes g6. b takes a5. Rook takes a5. Rook g1. Knight e7. Knight g5. f4. d5. Knight f3. Knight f6. g3. g6. Bishop g2. Bishop g7. Short castle. Short castle. d3. c5. Knight e5. Knight c6. Knight takes c6. b takes c6. e4. Knight d7. e5. Rook b8. c4. e6. Knight c3. a5. b3. f6. Bishop a3. f takes e5. f takes e5. Knight takes e5. Rook c1. Knight g4. Queen takes g4. Bishop d4 check. Game start. e4.